Hello and welcome to a special edition of the ROKER Report podcast. I'm Richard Speight in Wales and I'm joined down the line from Brighton, is it? By Kieran Maguire from the Price of Football podcast. How are you, Kieran?
I'm okay. I went through a bit of a dodgy patch for a couple of days, but the Sunderland stories restored me back to life.
It's invigorating. A set of accounts to look at. Seems to be what gets you going. So thanks for sparing a few moments of your time today to talk to me. You had a really interesting conversation with Chris Weatherspoon on the Wise Men Say podcast the other day, and I know that he's written extensively about this issue, and it was really good to hear you going through the detail of the revelations that I think most people will have seen by now that have come out in the last couple of days. It clarified a lot of things for me regarding the revelations and the writing off of the 20 million plus owed to the club by Madrox. Could you summarise for our listeners, Kieran, your take on the reasons why the club might have written off the debt?
Well, the club is owned by Madrox, but I think whoever buys Sunderland will buy Sunderland Limited or Sunderland AFC Limited, in effect. So they'll buy the football club and they will acquire all of its assets. Now, if one of those assets was a £20 million debt due from Madrox, then clearly that would influence the price you'd pay if you were aware of its existence. And that would be over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. I don't know how long the period is, would be cash you'd be expecting to receive. In the case of Sunderland Football Club, all clubs in the lower leagues are going through a really sticky patch. We don't know when football is going to return. So you look at football income, you've got match day, which Stadium of Light's going to be significant. You've got the TV deal, which will be somewhere between, from next season, being about £1 million in League One, £7 million in the Championship, if football's taking place. And then you've got commercial deals from your kit sponsors, front of shirt sponsors, and so on. But that will be linked to whether or not football's taking place. So potentially you could lose all three of your regular sources of income. So the £20 million due from Madrox might be something you'd be budgeting for. But by writing off that debt, which is perfectly legal, that cash wouldn't therefore be receivable.
So it puts the club in a more vulnerable position financially.
Well, it means that whoever is going to be running the club, and remember, no sale has taken place as yet. So if no sale takes place over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, and I think Mr. Donald and Mr. Methven have both said, we got a 5-year project, which seems inconsistent with the noises that I've been hearing for at least 12 months, and I think clearly you and Sunderland have been hearing as well. So there is an inconsistency there. If they are going to own the club for 5 years, actually, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. If they are looking to sell the club, then whoever takes over, that would make it more difficult for them because it's reducing the cash.
Absolutely. So, Charlie Methven, you mentioned there, he's boasted that kind of the operating costs at the club have been dramatically reduced, and that it's now on a more sustainable footing in interviews he's done, etc. And you've described the club in your interview with Chris the other day as relatively debt-free. Does that put us in a strong position relative to other clubs in League One when it comes to surviving what's going on at the minute and surviving post-COVID-19?
Well, there's two types of costs in any business, and I don't want to sound like an accountant, but there's what we refer to as fixed costs. Fixed costs are things that you've got to pay regardless. So there'd be things like the rates, which you won't have to pay because we're in sort of a furlough scheme for taxes as well. You're going to have to go and pay sort of maintenance costs on a regular basis. And then you've got, for a football club, you've got a fixed cost in the form of the players' wages. Because if you get rid of the players, then you've got nothing to play football with. But of course, if you also get rid of the players, you get rid of their transfer value. So that's why we're seeing, it doesn't matter what club you are, that's going to be an issue because when football does return, either you've lost out on potential transfer fee income coming in, or you're going to have to go and pay money to recruit players. Now, it could be that there's going to be a vast pool of unemployed footballers this summer, and you'll be able to go and pick up 15, 20 unemployed footballers. And half the teams in League One last season didn't spend a penny signing players. So,
Yeah, we hardly spend any, and we're meant to have more money than all the other clubs put together. And yeah, so that is interesting. That there's going to be that churn, and there's the ability to take players on frees probably across the leagues. Just thinking about the accounts, because you mentioned, I think, to Chris, that you'd seen the accounts, that they've been something that you were aware of, these leaked accounts from their 2018-19, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I can't go into details, but somebody sent them to me first week in March and said,
right,
what do you think of these? And we had a word, we had a chat off record, and I felt it certainly would be inappropriate of me at the time to have gone public on them, because we don't know whether they are legitimate or not. And also, I'm fully aware that many organisations I wouldn't say that they're paranoid, but they're always worried about leaks. So therefore, they will put in mixed figures so that you can always go and trace back to where the leaks come from. So
yeah, almost like that town on the map that doesn't actually exist and is there to catch the copyright thief.
That's right,
absolutely. I do have a particular name, I can't quite remember it. But anyway, so you've seen those accounts. You've seen what it consists of the leak. How close from those figures were Sunderland to breaking even day to day in terms of its operating costs, the way it was run?
I can't say, unfortunately, because again, that might give something away.
Right.
So I don't want to be sort of I know, but I can't tell you. But I genuinely feel I don't want to go and drop somebody else in it.
Right. No, that's absolutely fine, and we're not after kind of lynch mobs either out on the streets of Sunderland.
But I mean, has the cost base come down? Yes. It did seem a bit self-congratulatory, the comments from Mr. Methven, because you would expect any football club 2 years after being relegated to have got its cost base down, because that is the purpose of parachute payments. Otherwise, and I appreciate there's a debate about parachute payments. If you don't have parachute payments, you are jumping off a cliff financially, because you're going from £100 million in the Premier League to £7 million in the Championship. And well, if you jump off a cliff, you tend to crash on and the reason why parachute payments were introduced was that before they existed, there were lots of clubs getting relegated from the Premier League, going down to the Championship, and then very quickly ending up in administration. So that's the purpose of the parachute payments. It's to give the club a couple of years to get that wage bill down, either by contracts expiring or by selling the players or by coming to some form of arrangement with the player. So I think that's in the main is what we've seen at the Stadium of Light. So what they've done is what you'd expect them to do. Stoke have taken a different approach, but Stoke are being bankrolled by Bet365.
Well, that brings us on to kind of the next part of the conversation, really, which is looking at the future. Obviously, there aren't too many folk around of the wealth of the owners of Bet365 and Stoke City, who will be able to keep putting cash in until, well, probably the interest will cover the cash they're putting in. But we often hear that in a financial crisis, investors, financiers are often looking to try and hoover up underpriced assets. How would you characterise the marketplace for buying and investing in clubs like us right at the minute? Obviously, Newcastle are they're in a different situation, going through a takeover at the minute. So there's obviously a market for football clubs. But what's it like at this level?
It is at present very much a buyer's market, in the sense that there are a number of distressed clubs. So I'm aware of other clubs on your coastline that are presently up for sale, and I'm aware of the prices that are being asked for them, and the buyers are turning around and laughing at those prices. And I say, well, divide that by 3, and perhaps we might start to talk. We have seen clubs being bought earlier this year. So Charlton, who were in the Championship, they went for £1. I think Wigan went just before Christmas. And those were at prices lower than Sunderland. But clearly those are clubs with smaller fan bases. but they also have the benefit of Championship TV revenue. So there's a bit of swings and roundabouts. It is a market where if you wanted to buy a football club for £1 today, a deal is on, because what you're doing is, it's not the fact that you're buying the club, is that you're actually buying a commitment to pay the wages for players for the remainder of their contracts and the overheads, and you've got no money coming in. So the existing owner is walking away from that burden. So that's why you're getting the name of the club for £1. I don't think Sunderland are in that position. Equally, if they are looking for the £35 million, which is the price which has been circulated, certainly in the present market, that looks frothy. That looks very high
at the top end
Yep.
end of the market. So obviously the value of EFL clubs is plummeting during this. We don't have football. We don't know when football's coming back, as you've said. With all this kind of complex financial talk going on, many of our listeners are going to be really nervous that Sunderland are in a perilous state. How would you kind of quantify the risk that Sunderland face at the minute in terms of their ability to continue as a business?
Well, everything at this stage is to do with cash flow. So, do they have cash in the bank? It would appear that the loan from FPP is around about £10 million, if the rumours are correct.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, that would have been cash which should have come into the club. That will give it some breathing space, allow it to pay the ongoing commitments. What additional cash does the club have coming in? It might have some outstanding. I'm just looking at my figures here. In 2018, they were due to receive £16 million in transfer fee income, but they had to pay out 18. So they were on a net deficit. Since then, you have to excuse me. I don't have the 2019 accounts.
No.
Yeah, the same as everybody
No one
else.
does.
But I don't have the knowledge of the club, so I don't know what your sales of players were since July 2018.
I don't think we've sold many players for that much money.
No.
I think Chris mentioned, we sold a couple of youngsters recently. That's upset a lot of the fan base, obviously, because you want to bring through young players, and it's a club that's always done that, always brought players through, and that has annoyed I think a few people. But if it's cash that's king at the minute, it maybe gives a certain explanation, if not an excuse, for the selling of those young players. You've said repeatedly on your podcast, which I am a fan of, massive fan of, as I've said, that the fans are the biggest investors in football, especially at our level, and that football should not be viewed simply as yet another business, a shop or a widget maker or whatever. We've seen that elsewhere in Europe. Clubs of all sizes are kind of social clubs. They're owned by their members, by their fans. How does that model work for, say, a German team like Hamburg, or in Spain, like with Bilbao or someone like that? How do they compete financially and stay afloat? Because they're competing in the same market as the Man Cities and Newcastles and those kinds of clubs.
Well, they are competing and they're not. What you have in German football culture is an acceptance that actually they're not going to try to outbid the big clubs, the ones that are going to be in the last 16 of the Champions League. They are going to have a budget and stick to it. The club is allowed to borrow money, but it's always done in a very cautious manner. And that means you accept a limited amount of potential success for your club. And if you take a look at Germany, Bayern have won the Bundesliga for the last 6-7 years now, which that's one of the downsides, because it means that if you have other clubs which are being effectively externally funded, and Bayern is externally funded to a certain extent, as is Wolfsburg, as are Hoffenheim, who've caused a huge stink with the way that they've been organised. So what you get is the club is more representative of the fan base. It also means that you can't just write out a cheque for £80 million because somebody thinks it's a good idea to do so. So that's the deal. But it's your club. And I think there is that more common sense of bonding. If we take a look at what's happened here in the UK, fan ownership, the experience is mixed. If you talk to people at Motherwell, absolutely fantastic, but Motherwell haven't spent money on a player for 8 years. So again, you buy into that. You accept that we probably know who's going to win the Scottish Premiership from year to year basis, and you're competing for third or fourth place, in a really good season. Partick Thistle have effectively now just become fan controlled because one of their former fans won the lottery. Effectively, he sadly passed away, and he put the club into fan ownership. So there are positive examples. Exeter City, another good example of a small community, city or town-based club that people are proud to be associated with, and it's relatively democratic. The downside is that Wycombe Wanderers were fan-owned until 2 or 3 months ago. Wycombe Wanderers would be out of business. Wycombe Wanderers would have gone into administration had they not been taken over privately, because simply they weren't making enough money to survive, and the running costs of the club were such that the committee who were effectively in charge, they knew that they had a significant problem. If you talk to Portsmouth fans, Portsmouth, again, they went through a series of toxic owners whose interests were to flip the club. Now, this might resonate with Sunderland fans. Somebody comes in, big fanfare. I've got the best interests of the club at heart, and literally from the following day, they're looking, can they go and find somebody else to sell it to at a profit? So Portsmouth, if you recall, they were in the Premier League. They actually went into administration in the Premier League, and then they went through a series of increasingly more unsavoury owners until finally they were rescued by the fans themselves. The downside of a fan-owned club is if you get to a certain level, it becomes very difficult to compete. In the Championship, the average losses are about 25 million. Now, how can the fan base fund those losses? They've got two choices. They can either say, we're going to have a regular funding exercises, but fans are people like you and me with regular jobs. Fans are people like you and me with kids and mortgages and so on. We simply don't have the money to do it. Or they say, well, we're not going to try to get sort of the average level of losses. We're going to do what Rotherham do. We're going to do what Burton Albion do. Set ourselves a low budget. Our target is to be in the top 3 of the bottom 6 of the Championship. And realistically, that's all they can do, because there is such a close correlation between the wages you pay and where you end up at the end of the season. So Portsmouth fans had that issue, and they sold out to Michael Eisner.
Do you think post-COVID-19, obviously there's been a lot of talk, I think Rick Parry was talking about this, the potential of a salary cap, £6,000 a week has been mooted. I know that you and Kevin were discussing this the other day on your pod. Do you think that salary cap, and the restructuring of football, which may well be restructured, you've seen it in Germany, they've restructured to a certain extent the structure of the league, that might open up a more sustainable route for clubs to be funded in a different way?
Potentially, yes, but it's fraught with difficulties. We have a salary cap in League One and League Two. Half the clubs are losing money. Mm-hmm. So does it mean reducing the cap? Potentially it does. As far as the Championship is concerned, the Championship, it's where oceans meet, because you've got a club such as Rotherham or Burton with a relatively small fan base, which can come up from League One, and it can be playing against Aston Villa or Newcastle or Sunderland, or a club that have just been relegated from the Premier League, who instantly start off with a £40 million parachute payment. But it also is a club that's just been relegated with players who are on salaries which were Premier League salaries, and even if they've got relegation clauses, the amounts being paid are still eye-watering. And if you are a fan of one of those clubs, what if you've got an owner, as we've seen with Stoke City, as we've seen with Fulham, who the owner has said, I'm a billionaire, so actually I want the club to return straight back to the Premier League. I've got these players on these contracts. When I signed them, I didn't think we were going to get relegated, so therefore I've not got relegation clauses. What can the EFL do in those circumstances? Because the EFL rules are not superior to English law. And in English law says that if I've got a contract to be paid £68,000 a week, which I don't know whether you saw the report in one, I think it was the Mail, the last week, which it showed the highest paid player, the highest paid manager, the highest paid kit man, the highest paid physio.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in the Championship. So the highest paid player in the Championship is on £68,000 a week.
Now that's probably Mitrovic, you were saying.
Well, yeah. It's said in the very coyly. It's said in the newspaper. He's a Southern-based player. Well, Mitrovic was a cracking centre forward in my view, who Newcastle let go to Fulham, and he just proved how good a striker he was. Fulham signed him on a very good deal. So I suspect it could be him. You've then got managers on £3.5 million. I think that's a northern-based club.
Yeah. I think you were suggesting it may be our rivals down the A1.
Correct.
You play in white.
Yes. And if an owner wants the club to get promoted, it does cause an arms race with other clubs. So clearly there is a problem. But parachute payments are both a good and an evil. So Rick Parry says they're an evil that must be eradicated. He was also one of the people that formed the Premier League, which created the gap between the Premier League and the Championship. So it would make it really difficult if you've got players in the Championship on £6,000 a week, and then the club gets promoted to the Premier League, where the average wage is around about 70k a week. Now, how do you... Some of them will get pay rises, but some of them simply won't be good enough. And all of a sudden, you've got to recruit effectively a whole team or a whole squad to play in the Premier League. And that causes issues. We've seen the issues between the Championship and League One. If you look at the three sides who were promoted last season, Charlton, Barnsley and Wigan, they are occupying the bottom three places in the Championship. You look at Rotherham are a yo-yo club. You look at Burton went up, stayed a couple of seasons. Wigan have been yo-yoing. Bolton were doing the same until their owners took them, effectively destroyed them. Well, so there's huge problems. Yeah,
and that isn't a position I think many Sunderland fans would like to see our club in. I don't think our self-perception is of a club that's bouncing between League One and the Championship, possibly bouncing between the Championship and the Premier League's just about acceptable for your average fan. But the picture you paint of the future of football is quite bleak, I have to say. It's realistic. It's realistic, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions need to be broken down at the minute about exactly what kind of parlour state we're in as a game. If you were putting yourself in the position of someone advising the shareholders of Madrox, what would you be telling them about where they should go, and both financially, but also in terms of what they have said themselves about the care that they have for the club? We saw on Sunderland Till I Die, Methan talking about the role of Madrox as custodians of the club. Well, if you were advising them as to what to do with this asset that they have, that is causing them so much media grief and other sorts of grief, what would you say?
Well, first of all, he chose the right words. Now, it could be that he chose the right words for public relations purposes, but their position is custodian. They are the guardians. that should be the role of a club owner. And I was talking to a guy called Gary Sweet, who's one of the owners at Luton, who's in exactly the same position, but they appeared to have a sort of a long-term plan. If I was advising Madrox, I would be saying, well, let's take a look at the budgets. And by all means, it looks like Methven has done that. What is realistic? Do we have the funds to allow the club to continue? If so, for how long? And if we don't, then what are our alternatives in terms of selling it? Is there a market for a prospective buyer? I wouldn't be looking to make a profit on it, and I think that's one of the disappointing things I've heard from Stuart Donald. He said, well, why shouldn't I make a profit? There's no reason why he shouldn't make a profit if he's run it well. But he inherited a club which has just been relegated to League One on one of the highest budgets for a League One club in terms of revenue, and he failed to deliver. So that is a black mark against his leadership. So I think desperately trying to make money isn't in necessarily the interests of the owners. Sometimes you've just got to accept it's best to get out now, and find people that do have either deeper pockets or a different strategy. And I don't know enough about the club. I've seen Sunderland till I die, like everybody else. And as a non-fan, it was captivating stuff. My wife's not a big football fan, but she watched it for the showbiz element. It was drama, it was box office. It was proper popcorn entertainment. But I wasn't emotionally invested like all the Sunderland fans that I know, and I work with two Sunderland season ticket holders, and I know how much it hurts them, and it'll be hurting you, Rich, and Chris, and the other people that I've spoken to and got to know, in the past few days. So,
yeah, it did hurt Sunderland till I die. I have to say, well, it wasn't an easy watch. Certainly towards the end, it was nice to begin with, but after that, the sheen. Certainly left for me. I was in tears by the end of it, to be absolutely frank, and I knew what was coming. I was there. So thank you so much for your time, Kieran. It's been an absolute honour to speak to you, and I hope you're feeling better soon.
Thank you.
Because I know you've not been too well, and do please keep an eye on our accounts when they're announced again. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about it on the Price of Football. And thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for the invite, Rich.
Cheers, no problem at all.